All right, let's talk about Bellevue. Bellevue, for some, is just that little area in between the villages and Ocala, which is kind of true. It is part of the Ocala metro area. But there's a lot of history in Bellevue, and I don't want to kind of overlook that. The city it is today, it's definitely had a lot going on before it became the city it is today. So let's go ahead and talk about some of that history. In April of 1839, the United States soldiers held talks with a group of Seminole Indians in an overnight excursion somewhere around Lake Lillian. Lake Lillian was a major area for the Seminole Native Americans because it was one of the only water sources at that time. Bellevue is very high and dry, which is great for those that are wanting to not have an issue with flooding or something like that. But at that time, it was more concerned with getting water. Lake Lillian was a major area. At that point, it was called 9 Mile Pond because it was almost exactly 9 miles to Fort King, which was, of course, Ocala today. So by 1843, there were a lot of folks that were receiving land under the Armed Occupation Act. By the 1850s, the Palots, the Eichelbergers, the Roaches, and the Foggs, among several other families, had developed sizable plantations in Bellevue. Now, a big part of the history there was something called a development firm called the Marian Land and Improvement Company. And if you look through the old information, late 1880s, 1890s, going forward for Bellevue, there's a lot of mention of the Marian Land and Improvement Company. In fact, on some of the deeds even for the land in the area, there were prohibitions that like no alcohol was built right into the deeds of the land. It's really interesting stuff. But there's a lot of mention of the Marian Land and Improvement Company. The Florida Railway and Navigation Company arrived in the county in 1882, and that company was basically formed to promote and sell the land around Lake Lillian. So it was basically to promote and sell Bellevue, really. Lake Lillian was the major portion of Bellevue. Now, of course, Bellevue has expanded since they don't need to be right by the water these days. But Lake Lillian is still a source of activities because of the community center they have there, the beautiful lake, and also, of course, all of the playgrounds and the splash pad and pavilions and so forth that they have right out there. So it's still, I would say, the center of town. That's really where a lot of stuff happens. And that's basically, if you go to Bellevue for the day for fun, you definitely go to Lake Lillian because that's where everything is. Now, going back to the story of Bellevue, there's actually the story of Bellevue written by former Bellevue Chamber of Commerce President Vincent Razzano, and it was written in the late 1950s. Back then, the area was considered a health haven in the midst of natural and attractive scenery and rolling terrain. So basically this Lakeview Hotel was at that point known as the Hotel Sanitation. Now, if you knew back in 1910 to 1950s, there was, Dr. Kellogg and all of these sanitation facilities, sanitariums, where it was basically those with feeble health or that were elderly would go to these, essentially what we would have spas now, and to try different methods to have their vitality back. So there was one actually in Bellevue as well. And this was owned and operated by a Dr. H. Knight. And it was supposed to be the waters and the nice climate that we have here where it's not too hot and not too aggressively cold either, was supposed to be really helpful for people's health. And they had snowbirds even back then. Of course, instead of flying back and forth or even driving at that time, they actually had a lot of people come in on the train. And at that point, it was actually fairly common for everybody in town to go and say hello or goodbye to those that were coming down en masse for the spring and for the fall. So they would all come down, and they were all excited to see these people they haven't seen all year, and then wish them the best and all well wishes in the springtime. So it was actually kind of a community event to say hello and goodbye to them. So kind of cool with that. There was a lot of issues with fires. Oh my goodness. Now, Bellevue has one of the oldest United States Postal Services, I think in Florida, really. The post office went back to 1883. It's been in continuous operation since 1883. Now, it has moved locations in that time frame, of course. We even had a newest one back in 1990. But we had a post office in Bellevue in 1883. So that's saying something. So at that time, there were issues again with that water and only having a fire department that was volunteer. And they only had a 40-gallon pumper truck basically with one hose. So and everything was really kind of built out of frames. So it was wood. So to see that things burnt down, yeah, at one point the entire town burnt down. I believe it was in the 1920s. They really did have to battle fires like crazy. The one that got me, there's some really funny, I mean, I think it's funny at this point, but back then probably not such a great thing. But there was a fire that destroyed, actually twice fires destroyed the library building along with all the books, except for those out on loan, of course. So they did have to replace the library a few times. Also, a second city hall was built on the site of the first one, but on April 8th, 1935, it also burnt to the ground, catching fire when shards from a fire built by a local Methodist minister while he was raking and burning leaves blew into the bell tower. The Bellevue Fire Department was all volunteer, so yeah, it was a hand-drawn pump. I mean, it was just nothing to combat that. So, but yeah, with the insurance money and help from the Progress administration, they actually constructed a third city hall, and they made that with limestone from the area, and that was built between 1935 and 1940. A lot of those buildings that were built way back in the day with all of that history are still there. There's so much history that you can really dive into that are still standing in Bellevue. I highly recommend you take a look, get some of the history, figure out where those buildings are, and just, drive by the scenic area. Take time out to stop by Lake Lillian. It has pavilions, picnic tables, a playground. It has a walking track. Of course, it has a splash pad as well, which is totally free and very enjoyable on a hot summer's day. There's also picnic tables right by the splash pad, some shade for us adults, and there's restrooms nearby so the kids can take a break in there real quick. The artwork is absolutely gorgeous. They have some great artwork by E.J. Nieves, and I think you would be astounded by how gorgeous the community center has turned out. It's really, really bright, really colorful, and it's definitely attention-getting. The city of Bellevue at this point only has about 5,000 people living there. There's about 1,600 families or homes that live that are in Bellevue. The city motto is it's a city with small town charm. And I think that's definitely the truth. It is a very small town. It is growing, the same as anything in the Ocala Metro is. So it's definitely not going to necessarily stay small, but I still think it's going to continue to have its charm. Back in the late 1880s, they produced over 250,000 bushels a year of citrus. And while they had devastating freezes that forced most of the growers out of production, it is still something that you can see lots and lots and lots of citrus trees all throughout town. And all in that section of the county. So as you're driving around, as you see those citrus trees all over the place, you can think back of the history and what it was like in the late 1800s and early 1900s, and kind of really still see that history. There is currently one of the houses up for sale that was built in 1901 right over by Lake Lillian. If you happen to see it, has a purple door and purple trim. It's really cute. But that is one of the historical homes, really, of the area. And you can just imagine what life was like back in 1901 when that house was created. And quite frankly, with as many fires as City of Belleview had at that time frame, it's truly remarkable that the house still stands. It has definitely stood the test of time. And if you are wanting a historical home, that is one I would definitely recommend to take a look at. All right, you guys have a great day, and thanks so much for watching.